welcome to Interdependent Study, our podcast where we engage in the learning and unlearning work for collective liberation. I'm Damien.
And I'm Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us today. Each week we'll bring something new to the table and discuss our thoughts and feelings about it through the lenses of who we are and where we can go for a more just society.
We want Interdependent Study to be a space where we're always learning with one another. And Aaron, you're up this week. What are you bringing to the table today?
I'm bringing an article called They Worked Underground in the Uranium Mines. They've been surrounded by death ever since, which is an amazing title.
Yes.
And it was written by Sarah Lazare, and it was published by In These Times and Workday magazine in a partnership. And it tells the story of Leslie Begay, a former uranium miner in the late 70s and early 80s, and his health struggles and lack of restitution for the clear hazards that he was exposed to without any warning or protective equipment.
Right.
And the article goes into some of the backdrop of what the U.S. government and mining companies knew about the hazards, how they recruited people into this work, the continued avoidance of any of the necessary cleanup, while also mentioning how the federal government has been ramping up nuclear weapons production and has identified new mines they want to reopen to meet the goals of expanding the nuclear arsenal through so-called modernization.
Yes.
And I mentioned Demon Mineral, the documentary we watched in January when I introduced this article last week.
That's right.
And there's definitely some overlap in the elements of the story here and in that documentary, which was a great callback for me of thinking back to that documentary and how incredible the storytelling was in that and how heartbreaking it was of what's been happening there.
Right.
And all of the different kind of concepts that people added to the context of that documentary. But yeah, how about you? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, well, that's a beautiful introduction and segue because I also think that this article itself was beautiful and illustrative of what's been happening and such a compelling piece and a great expansion on what we learned from Demon Mineral. And I remember having some of the same thoughts and feelings reading this as to when we watched that documentary.
Yeah.
And it's just so disheartening and sad to learn and to understand just how awful the federal government's decisions have been in terms of targeting Indigenous communities in this way. So Sarah Lazare highlights the fact that the United States has disproportionately built the uranium mining industry on top of Navajo lands in order to get the necessary materials for nuclear weapons, and how they specifically recruited Navajo workers to fill those jobs in the mines and to do the work. And while all of the federal government's decisions around this, I think, were atrocious, I think the most despicable is what Sarah says here. Quote, Navajo communities were not informed of how dangerous this work was, and it has left a trail of loss for those who worked in the mines and mills and for those who drank poisoned water and breathed poisoned air.
Yep.
And so not only was this work dangerous and detrimental to the health of the Navajo workers in the mines, the entire industry was harmful to everyone who lived near and around those mines.
Yep.
You know, so the environmental racism and the nuclear colonialism committed by the federal government has had such a wide-ranging impact on entire communities and generations of Indigenous communities with these mines.
Yeah, and it continues to have an impact today because there's been very little.
Yes.
You could call it no. You
Yeah.
could call it no cleanup.
Uh-huh.
And so that's continuing to have an impact because the air's still poisoned.
Yeah, it's all still there.
It's all still there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's long-term impact and continuing to have an impact today.
Yes.
And so one of the other things I wanted to highlight was how much the government and the mining companies knew about the truly deadly effects of working in uranium mines.
Yes.
So Sarah writes, quote, the federal government knew the dangers of uranium mining. One study published in 1879 documented the deadly long-term effects of uranium mining on the border of Germany and what is now the Czech Republic. Researchers discovered that 75% of the miners died from lung cancer.
Wow.
Yet the Atomic Energy Commission did not inform workers of the risks, and it declined to push for any health and safety regulations on radon, the radioactive gas created when uranium decays. States failed to enforce sufficient regulations of their own. So the government, federal and state, knew the hazards. They knew what they were sending people into, and they did nothing to prepare them and nothing to protect them. And it truly demonstrates how disposable Indigenous people are viewed by the U.S. government. And this is an extension of the intentional violence perpetrated against indigenous peoples by the U.S. government, from removal from land to forced marches across the country to smallpox blankets and massacres. This is all just echoes of history in a different way, and we're pushing people underground to dig up uranium mines so we can kill other people across the world with nuclear weapons. That's what this cycle is.
Yeah,
right?
and using those folks who are digging up the mines and killing them as well.
Yes.
Right? You know? Yeah, that quote was stunning to me, particularly that 75% of miners dying from lung cancer. That just broke my heart. And I know that was,
That's 1879 numbers too, right?
1879
So we've known about this.
Yes,
Wow.
yes. And, that disposability factor that you mentioned is also really sickening and sad as well. And we've talked a lot about that. It's kind of just wild that the federal government has just always operated this way when it comes to marginalized communities, and certainly communities of color as well. We unfortunately just have thousands of examples of that throughout history. And as you said, it continues.
And which is why we're not supposed to learn about it anymore.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, absolutely. Well, actually, in building on what you shared about how the federal government knew the dangers of this and didn't inform Navajo workers and communities about them, Sarah actually a little bit later on goes to say, quote, at the same time, the Atomic Energy Commission conducted epidemiological studies on the miners without their fully informed consent. Starting in 1950, the Public Health Service began following miners, white and Navajo, to monitor their uranium exposure levels and watch for cancer and other health problems. To gain access from mine owners, the researchers agreed that PHS would not inform miners of the hazardous conditions. They simply told the miners they were studying workers' health and said little else. A report produced in 1995 by the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, established by President Bill Clinton, acknowledged the federal government committed an ethical breach. Had miners been told the true purpose of the study then, even in advance of any warnings connected with the progress of the research, it is possible the miners could have used this information to advocate for their own interests, the report states. And so the atrocities here are manyfold, right? Not only did the federal government know of these hazards, like you said, they also colluded with the state government and these mining companies to keep that information from the workers while studying them. And so for me, it was just like the compounding levels of evil were just kind of astounding here.
The demand for uranium was completely propped up by the federal government.
Yes.
The federal government was the only entity in the U.S., at least, buying uranium during most of the production of these mines. And so that's another layer that is important to note. We're building this arsenal, so we're propping up these terrible, hazardous, deadly conditions to dig out uranium so that, again, we can kill other people or be the biggest, baddest bully on the block across the world. So it's just compounding. What do you say? Compounding levels of evil.
Yeah.
Well, so that's sort of history. Right?
Yeah.
Sort of. Let's talk about new development of nuclear weapons. So Sarah writes, quote, the United States is expanding its funding of nuclear weapons, with successive presidential administrations backing a massive investment over the next 3 decades, which translates to huge annual budget increases. From 2023 to 2024, the United States saw the world's greatest increase in spending on nuclear weapons, putting more money toward nuclear weapons than all of the other nuclear-armed countries combined, according to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. The same GOP budget bill that expands Radiation Exposure Compensation Act also earmarks $15 billion for nuclear modernization. So this is aid that has been rolled into the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that is being handed out to people who have been impacted by mining, and it's a PR stunt to cloak the development of new mines, the development of new weapons that the government wants to do, and they want to open up new ones, or they want to find old ones and that they want to reopen that are not fully mined yet, whatever it is. And they still haven't compensated people yet. They haven't cleaned anything up yet. And now there are billions earmarked for new mining efforts, and so we can modernize, so to speak. Modernize is a really great euphemism We can modernize our nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
And it's just a continuation of those layers of evil that you mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a continuation of a vicious cycle of predation and violence across the world.
Yeah. And it, to me, if I'm being honest, just feels so unnecessary, so wholly unnecessary.
Yeah.
Given the known costs to real human lives. And as you said, the potential risk and harm to lives if we were ever to use said nuclear arsenal.
Yeah.
It just, to me, feels so unnecessary, especially given all the things we talk about in this podcast and the ways in which we need $15 billion and what we could use $15 billion for in this current moment. It's astonishing.
We don't have money for all kinds of things, but we got money to modernize the nuclear arsenal
And
to the tune of $15 billion this year.
Continue to kill all of these people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So building on actually what you talked about, Sarah says this, quote, on March 20th, the Trump administration signed an executive order that invoked wartime authority to increase production of critical minerals, including uranium. Yeah. The administration has identified several mines in New Mexico as priorities under the Fast 41 designation, which refers to a federal initiative established 10 years ago to fast-track certain permitting. Among them are sites in or near Navajo territory. They would be the first active uranium mines in the states in more than 50 years. And I read that and it just makes me go, why? Like, why is this necessary? You know, why does this administration need to invoke this quote unquote wartime authority to continue to put Navajo and Indigenous communities at risk? And as you pointed out, why instead haven't you compensated these people and cleaned up the old mines instead of barreling ahead with the same atrocities you've committed over and over and over again? You know, these people be damned. It's just so evil.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to put into words.
It really is. Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about application.
Okay.
How does this article and our conversation today apply to our day-to-day lives and work? My application is a throwback to the nuclear colonialism term that we were introduced to in Demon Mineral.
Yes.
So we learned that term from Leona Morgan, who is a co-founder of the Nuclear Issues Study Group. She said, this is what nuclear colonialism is. All of this is taking land, contaminating our water, desecrating our sacred sites, and damaging our genetic future. And with some of this additional context from this article, we know that there were schools that mining companies ran to recruit more miners from the Navajo people.
Yes.
And no protections, and there has been no cleanup. And this is nuclear colonialism. It's a clear echo of the settler colonial violence that this government, that the United States has consistently visited upon Indigenous people.
Yes.
It's removal of land and making the land hazardous to people's very existence.
Ooh, that part.
And when communities have a sacred connection to land and that relationship to land, there's an extra kind of layer of heinousness.
Yes.
If that's a word.
Yeah.
To it all. And it's truly another example of the despicable history and present of the capitalist, imperialist, white supremacist patriarchy of the United States.
Absolutely. Yes to all of that. And, you know, we didn't really talk about it today, but you just mentioned as part of this piece, but the Indigenous people's feelings and beliefs around the land and their connection to the land is a huge part of this. And you're right. Heinousness, if it's not a word, it is now. It absolutely is. And great job bringing in what we learned about nuclear colonialism from Demon Mineral to this, because that's absolutely what's happening here for sure. I think that connects really well, actually, to what I was thinking about as application, which is just how sad all of this is, given how it's affecting real people and real communities, and certainly generations of Indigenous families and communities to come. You started this by talking about Leslie Begay as sort of the case study for this. There's lots of folks mentioned and referenced and interviewed in this piece as well. But I wanted to share part of how Sarah closed this article to sort of talk about this and highlight it. So Sarah says, quote, Leslie Begay's energy can be low, which often keeps him homebound, but he goes to his grandchildren's baseball games when he can. And he breaks into a laugh when he recounts how his 3-year-old granddaughter always asks him for money by rubbing her thumb over the tip of her index finger. He wears leather, engraved suspenders, and a baseball hat that says Semper Fi, the motto of the U.S. Marine Corps, which he served in during the Vietnam War. Nora Begay, his wife, has long, dark hair, dons cat's eye glasses, and has the habit of touching her husband on the arm when talking about him. Leslie Begay still thinks of the people he knows who died young. Lots and lots, he says. I mean, many, many people, good friends. It was always sad news to hear. Mm-hmm. And it is, in fact, really sad. And it's just a horrific reminder of the impact of nuclear colonialism, like you mentioned, and that disposability factor that you mentioned. And, just a reminder for us that, these are real human beings that deserve better than this from all aspects of our government, and they're just not getting it.
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about homework.
Okay.
What do we want to do to continue our learning and unlearning work beyond our conversation today? My homework is to read one of the articles that is linked in this article, which is called Uranium Widows in Navajo Country. It was written by Wudon Yan and published by the Sierra Club. And it was published in October 2020, so it probably has a slightly different perspective than the one we have now, with additional budget allocations for new mining efforts that we mentioned earlier. But it's an exploration of how people have been impacted in this community. And I think foregrounding that, understanding what that has looked like as we move into potentially more mining, I think is really important.
Yeah, I think anything else we can do to continue to learn about this would be important. So I'll co-sign that homework. You mentioned this at the top. I'd like to check out Workday Magazine. Yeah. I didn't realize until the very end that this was a joint piece between In These Times and Workday Magazine. And I pulled the quote, the Workday Magazine is a nonprofit newsroom devoted to holding the powerful accountable through the perspective of workers, which I think is great. I had not heard of Workday Magazine before reading this piece. That first thought I had about Workday was the platform we use at work, which I shudder. But I hadn't heard of this, so I'd love to check them out and see what we might be able to read and learn from their work and maybe even bring to the podcast.
Yeah, they are part of the Movement Media Alliance.
That's right.
And so they're definitely somebody to check out more of their work from.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for our conversation today about this really incredible article. Damien, you're up next time.
Yeah.
What do you bring to the table in our next episode?
Yeah, well, next week is an exciting week for us and our podcast because it will be the final episode of 2025.
Brought to you on the final day of 2025.
Literally the final day of 2025, too. And anyone who's been listening to us for a while knows what that means. It means it's time for our 2025 year in review episode.
Yes.
So next week, we'll each share our respective favorite memories and highlights from this past year and talk about them with each other. And I don't know about you, but this episode always brings me a lot of joy. I look forward to it every year. It's one of my favorite episodes that we get to do. So I'm looking forward to doing some reflection work this week about everything we did this past year on the podcast. We've had, 50 some odd episodes this year?
This is number 50.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm so excited to think back on all of that, look back on all of that work, and talk about my highlights of the year with you next week.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I always look forward to that episode as well. Yeah.
50. Wow.
Yeah, so that's going to be number 51.
51.
We only took one real week off this year, which is
amazing.
Its own accomplishment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Probably have a few more gray hairs because of it, but it is an accomplishment we have
great.
done. All right. Well, with that, we want to thank you for joining us today. You know what I'm going to ask you to do here, but in case you forgot, please follow, leave a rating and review, share our podcast with the people in your life. Follow us on social media, including Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Check us out on YouTube and sign up and join us on Patreon to get notified about any new things we've got going on behind the scenes.
Yes. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's not about us, but it is about all of us. We'll talk to you next week.